come together and then have a holistic look. Does that framework accomplish our goals? And if it doesn't, then we wordsmithly get it. I think it feels like a slog, and we're far. I don't think we're that far away. So I think but it certainly feels like we're pretty far away. But I don't think in reality we are. So I think that should be our due diligence, just to get through the side by side, and then take a big overarching look at what we got, and then go from there and make sure it lines up with the goals we've heard. We've heard a lot of testimony about what things have been working, and I know I've got my legal pad here with notes. I've been calling around to my local people and figuring out what they think and what they don't think. And I think I have a pretty, I think the people out, my district had the same concerns that we've been hearing. So it's so I'll leave it at that.
Representative Dolan.
I just, for expediency, I just listed some of the improvements I think that we've all been talking about, and we can, on a big conceptual basis, maybe ask that Ellen try to integrate these, but we can, I think we potentially could agree to all these. One is to keep the district commissions. The second is on the record. Third is,
I'm not sure, do we all agree to on the record?
or we can look at that.
Yeah.
Third is standardized involvement between the district commissions and IRB with training. That seems to be a logical way to get kind of alignment and consistency and support. The next is the appeals going, if we do on the record what the appeals would go to, like Supreme Court, local and A&R appeals to the environmental court, and then we would add resources. And I think that I was thinking X number of resources to restore and enhance the functions at the district level, district commission level. And I had put 4, that could be, but that could be an X number. Anyway, what I tried to do is align from what we've heard and what we seem to be somewhat nodding our heads about, and the type of enhancements. And just ask Ellen to, incorporate what that looks like. So it's more or less keeping, keeping the existing model with some enhancements that reflects I think some of the existing opportunities that we've heard are problematic with the existing system.
So this is kind of a round-robin discussion. What I've been thinking about is, what if we divided the bill up by jurisdiction, criteria, administrative, work administrative, and get that together so it's really tight, send it out as a separate bill, then come back and do the criteria. And then the jurisdiction, if we don't get to everything, we still have what we have done. We can take some kind of, sense of that we've done everything possible to give it a full airing and move on from there. I hate to, to me there's a lot of moving parts in this bill, and there's some things I still have a lot of problems with. So that's why I'm just throwing that out as another option. Let us divide it here and send it out in 2 chapters. I think it has to be a separate bill.
Well, I hear you on that. I'm not ready to do that. I feel like we need to keep going through. Ellen will be in at 10, and we will continue. We've gotten through a lot of the sections already, so I just assume keep going and stay where we are. Which brings me to take a break now, even though I usually do breaks at every hour and a half. But if we break now, we can then go through with Ellen, and then we'll hear from VHCB folks and have lunch.
What's that about? Mr. Wildlife folks?
No, Vermont Housing Conservation Board today in the State House. So we will adjourn. adjourn and come back at 10. Recessing.
Now
We're going off. I say that to turn the recorder off.
Does that do anything, or is that just?
Let's just say you know.
Meeting with our legislative council.
I'm Czajkowski, Office of Legislative Counsel. I am here on Act 250. Where should we left off last night on the Rivers program.
Page 7.
Page 7 of the side-by-side is what we were working on last night. That is the green chart dated 1/22/20. So the next set of changes are related to updating criterion 5, the traffic criterion. The language that is in your committee bill is reflected in the joint proposal. They are the same. So,
We love those sections.
great.
I assume that's okay with everyone.
Onto page 8. Municipal impacts. So this is a new proposal that is not in your committee bill. It is in the joint proposal though, is updating criteria 6 and 7. And it's requiring that if a municipality fails to respond to requests related to either criteria, they are presumed not to have an unreasonable burden. So criteria 6 deals with educational services, and criterion 7 relates to burdens on municipal and governmental services. So often the municipalities are asked if they will experience a burden on either the educational or municipal services based on a project application. And so this is asking that they respond within 90 days.
So I think we heard some testimony yesterday from, I think it was the league on this. So, and there was I'm gonna try to pull it up in my limited space here, but I think there was a suggestion for how to make this better.
Going from 90 to 120 days.
That was facetious, I thought.
I didn't think that was the substantive help. The other one was more about.
She said that.
She said
'Cause
that.
She said it, but I don't think she meant.
Nine,
Oh my
that-
God.
Let's
She
just.
did.
She did.
Karen,
I thought it was kind of like, just because they don't respond doesn't mean there isn't an issue. So
right. So
is
she
there
had
a
a
way to
suggestion
have it
there.
considered nevertheless?
And she didn't know what we meant by educational services.
That's right.
Well, she questioned that in the changed educational environment. But I thought there was a proposal for how to, instead of assuming there were no concerns, somehow making the district commission be responsible for deciding or looking at that.
Yeah.
And I'm looking. Did she supply written testimony?
No, but she said she was going to send it
I
in.
think it was sent it.
Yeah, I think she did.
Oh, here we go. Default should not be no burden. Unreasonable burdens. the town does not respond to the issues come off the table, the board could make a decision, not every town responds. Today, the district commission responds to those issues. So, I think it's really around that, if the town doesn't respond, that issue shouldn't be removed. That shouldn't be presuming to meet the criteria. So, we'll think about that.
Well,
No response doesn't make it not relevant. Representative Bowen.
I'm not sure what the action step there in your mind was, but,
Sure I have one, yeah.
I totally agree with that. I mean, this is an effort by the administration, I believe, and certainly the town should be responding within 90 days. I would agree with that. But at the end of that 90 days, what I think you just said is, that doesn't take it off the table. I think so. The default is if they don't respond in 90 days, the board, we would have to add language, and this is the action step, but the board shall consider it as a responsibility of the applicant to prove that it's not creating an impact or a burden, because otherwise this just hastens the process without the necessary considerations. There are many towns who don't have the ability maybe to respond in 90 days because of their firepower. They don't have a town manager, they don't have a who knows what. And there are many things that a lot of towns don't have and maybe don't want to have, but not the ability to be that nimble. So, and I think she sort of touched on that, but and she did say 180 days, I think, maybe to accommodate those towns. But at any rate, I think we ought to see some language in our next iteration that this isn't something we're deciding now, is to see some language that if not that, if they don't respond in 90 days, then the applicant will automatically bear the burden of proving.
Doesn't the applicant already bear the burden of proving?
Only if,
Yeah.
well, now, only if it's determined that there may be an issue. I mean,
Let's hear from
Yeah.
Ledge Counsel.
So, we're in the criteria section, so this is something that the applicant has the initial burden of production. They have to prove initially that their proposed development will not cause an unreasonable burden on either the educational services or the municipal services. Under the burden of persuasion, opponents have to currently demonstrate that they're not meeting that standard. Also, these are one of the handful of sections that a permit can't be denied for either of these criteria. So these are both in sections where the opponent has to prove that there is a burden, an unreasonable burden on either of these things, and even still, a permit can't be solely denied on a unreasonable burden on those.
all well and good, but to me, the language says if they don't respond in 90 days, they're presumed not to have an unreasonable burden. And that means that takes the board out of it at that point. I'm thinking. Tell me I'm wrong. And likewise with 7.
I guess when I look at this proposal, I'm thinking the goal is that some towns are not responding.
Yep.
And development community is held up in having this criterion be met. And so is there a way for us to have, I mean, the 90 days seems reasonable to me on the face of it, and yet, you know, we took testimony that some towns don't have the capacity to respond, and that, so somehow, I guess you talked about the production and the persuasion. Under these criteria, the applicant has already produced evidence that says we don't have an impact on municipal services or education, right?
Oh, is that, the timing works that way?
So when they're making their proposal, they have to address, when they submit their application, they have to address 6 and 7 and provide some evidence. And I think often it comes in the form of a letter or a statement from the town regarding these 2 criteria.
Thoughts on this one? Alright, I would suggest we put it in our bill, and, we'll come back to it. Okay.
We spent a lot of time on forest blocks. So I think the next section is at the bottom of page 11, criterion 9K, which is the public investment criterion. So as we previously discussed, your committee bill includes updating the public investment criterion to include facilities or lands receiving benefits through VHCB, the state designation program, or the Vermont Downtown and Village Tax Center Tax Credit Program. And the joint proposal only adds facilities or land receiving benefits from VHCB.
Could you expand on that a little bit? What is the difference?
The what?
What is the difference between the 2 proposals? The administration and what we have in our bill? Is ours is more comprehensive?
It includes other things you have to sort of justify, prove that you haven't caused unreasonable burden on things that are under the designation program or receiving a tax credit. So theirs is just more limited in what you need to address in your permit.
And if I may add, I mean, it's, what we see on our proposal, about a third of the way down, our proposal included the language, the state designation programs, the Vermont Downtown Village Center Tax Credit Program. And I appreciate the narrowing in on the joint proposal because it is the most sensitive of this list of VHCB and these 2 items. So I think it just simplifies it and it's more relevant to the VHCB when you have state dollars invested in housing and conservation. So I think it makes sense. It's fine.
The joint one?
Yeah.
I'm okay with the joint proposal.
Ching.
Alright, on page 12, criterion 9F, which is the energy criterion. So Your committee bill adds reference to energy efficiency being addressed under this criterion, as well as requiring evidence of meeting energy conservation and energy efficiency through certification established through inspection. It adds reference to the stretch codes and directs the board to adopt rules establishing an inspection process. And the joint proposal only adds the reference to the stretch codes.
And we asked why efficiency was taken out, but I don't remember the answer.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I remember a testimony a year ago where one of the problems that exists currently is there's no inspection for efficiency. It's just kind of, miss. And I like our proposal in the sense that it does, talk about efficiency, and does talk about establishing an inspection, which I think is relevant.
Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I think, depending on a lot of I was gonna say, depending on the town, your local inspector will, the local building inspector will, walk through efficiency things at the building, but assuming the town has that position, I guess, is.
Which I don't think
Which
many
probably
towns, I
mine-
think Burlington
mine-
has it.
Oh, really? Well, I know the Montpelier, guy will walk through it and.
So Montpelier has one.
But well, he's the building inspector, not the efficiency inspector, but he'll just kind of, walk you through the thing, like it should be, the code for efficiencies or this.
I think, did you, someone else, the challenge for me on this one is we did take good testimony on how we need this statewide. I don't know if, like the Natural Resource Board is the place for that to happen. And not that many developments. I mean, 20% of development or something is reviewed under Act 250. So the compelling testimony was from the Vermont Builders Association that I remember of, if this is a required code, we need an even level playing field for all of us to abide by it. And I've been looking for a place for that to happen, but it may not, I don't know. I don't know if this is the right place for it.
Yeah, I think Elcar sent letters to committees of jurisdiction around this issue. I think we may have gotten one. Or maybe went to energy and
I
technology.
went to energy.
Because we were looking at the commercial and residential building codes through Elcar, the changes to the rules. And that was an issue that was very prominent in our conversation and discussion. So letters have been sent to the relevant committees in the House and the Senate to deal with this issue of enforcement. So that was suggested this by Representative Holmes.
Representative McCullough and Dave.
So, yes, to everything I've heard. I only want to back it up with I was on this summer on the Energy Caucus, and my portion of that was thermal efficiency, and we had 6 meetings throughout the summer in this room, and it was packed with every representative that would touch. Bankers, realtors, contractors, contractors associations, everybody. Just about everybody. 99.9.
We know that everybody does fit into the Ethan Allen room.
Agreed. Over those 6 meetings, we needed to have inspection and requirements, and that the codes be met, and that they were promoting putting it into the Department of Public Safety. But I don't know that they have ability to make rules. So I don't know about the rules part either. But we got to keep energy efficiency in there, and efficiency, and we might even want to add, because of the testimony, we got thermal efficiency, and I think we would want to add also commercial, not just residential.
Is this just residential? Is this just, why do you say?
Just
Is this,
differentiate.
this is all development that gets reviewed under Act 250?
Yeah. It includes,
I'm sorry, would you say again, please?
Well, this, I don't think, you said add residential, but this is a criteria in Act 250 that applies to all development that comes under Act 250.
Okay, so commercial and residential are automatically included, of course. Yes, okay then, so, back that thought out. But our version, and then, in the meantime, maybe we can find out from the Energy and Technology Committee, who's been really working on this since January 1, so to speak, where they think, what they think about board shall adopt rules, which board, who, adopt rules. So,
Okay. Carrie?
yeah, I agree with the discussion that we're having. To add efficiency, the term conservation has often been used to include efficiency, but it's been misunderstood to just simply mean turn off the lights or reduce your energy. And efficiency, I think, is a more modernized word to talk about technology-based improvements. And so I think it makes sense for just clarity to include efficiency. And like the discussion here, the certification process accomplishes our goals, so I would recommend going with the joint adding, or ours, adding the language of ours, but not include the board shall adopt rules, because I think it's beyond the scope of this
But keep,
responsibility.
but keep by certification and established
Yeah.
through inspection, yeah.
So why wouldn't we just use our,
That's true then.
ours?
Oh, we would use ours, but not the
Oh.
last sentence.
Yeah, okay, so I agree with that.
Seems like it's gonna, that's fine. But I would like to point out, though, when we had this discussion, a lot of times, in terms of thermal efficiency seemed to be the best bang for the buck, simply, and it didn't, it's not regressive. I mean, I remember I was comparing what you could do with climate change, and one of the arguments of the other stuff, how would you, if you weren't gonna do a carbon tax, what else could you do that would not be regressive to people in the rural areas? And I think thermal is one of the ways to go.
Thermally efficient,
Yeah,
yes.
yes. So I would like to see that emphasized, to have thermal efficiency in there.
Okay, are we good on this one? Okay.
So, the next section is broadly about climate change. So, your committee bill separates out criterion 1 and 2. So currently under criterion 1, the language addresses water or air pollution. And so your bill breaks them up so that 1 is all air and then 2 is water. So that is not in the joint proposal. And then under your new air criterion, you add criterion for air contaminants and then greenhouse gas emissions. And under the greenhouse gas emissions, you adopt an avoid, minimize, mitigate standard for addressing greenhouse gas emissions. The joint proposal does not directly address air pollution. They do add a new criterion 9M, which is climate adaptation, and it incorporates some of the language that is used in under the greenhouse gas emissions criterion, and it looks for the building to employ building orientation, site and landscape design, and building design that are sufficient to enable improvements to be sited, constructed, to reasonably to have climate change adaptation. That wasn't the most eloquent way to say that, but that's more looking at building design to withstand climate change, and yours are looking more at air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions.
So they're pretty different. I think we should sort of take them separately. Although they share the common desire to address climate change, I think, in the bill. Let's take ours up first, so separating air into its own criteria. Is this all new language, or is it, what was the air criteria before, or now?
It's undue air pollution. And there is case law around that. But primarily the other sub-criteria under 1 currently are all water. So air is currently only addressed in the beginning. So this is all new language, adding specifics around air contaminants and greenhouse gas emissions.
Representative Dolan.
I do want to just bring to our attention that in my opinion, the entire bill that we're working on has a number of greenhouse gas related or climate change related improvements already that I want to bring to our attention. We talked about 9F just a second ago. We've talked about the downtown incentive program with the exemptions, which I think we'll get to still. We have talked about forest blocks, forest connectors, and fragmentation issues, and we've also talked about the river, the languages under what is in the existing criterion 1D. We also have in place criterion 8L, which works on settlement patterns, encouraging more compact development in downtown areas, which is trying to prevent sprawl and improve the livability of our communities. And I think it's just important to recognize in the context of Act 250, I think there's some improvements we've made that have been considering the importance of climate change and what we can potentially enhance through this modernization of Act 250. With that, I think having this language that we see in front of us on the joint proposal focusing on adaptation is helpful, because I think this is a missing link, a gap in our work. While the rivers, the change to the criterion 1D is an improvement, this fundamentally looks at flood resilience and the resilience of our infrastructure that is only going to save municipalities and the state funding in the long run if we can make our infrastructure going forward more resilient to the impacts So with that, I support the proposal and the joint language, joint proposal.
And the omission of hours.
Yeah.
Okay, Representative.
I really like ours. And I really like the joint proposal. And I would like to see how they could be merged. Everything that Carrie said is that this does fill in a whole bunch of the other spots that our climate initiative in this bill doesn't specifically address. And I think the administration and BNRC really has got a sweet spot here that we don't want to ignore, and I'd like to see it included in ours. There may be a need for council to. I'm not even sure. Well, there may be a need to tweak the word "some" in order so that it isn't redundant and silly, but probably not even huge. It's just like 9M, you know, and it's in there. I like it. I like both of ours. Theirs and of course theirs is ours in a way, Jeff.
You wanna call attention to climate adaptation, is that why you're like to
Yes,
see them?
yeah, put that in ours. Do them both. I don't think we really have to be in a world of either or.
I was thinking the same thing. I'd just like to say.
I was reading your mind.
May I add further justification? I appreciate your concerns and your interest, and I too am concerned about, obviously, greenhouse gases, and as we all, as a state and a nation, the reason why I think that the joint one is an improvement is because I think what we see described in our proposal to implement that are the very topics that I just mentioned about what we already have worked on, the 9F, 1D, 9F being energy efficiency and conservation, 1D being the floodway, river work, forest blocks, and the downtown. I struggle with, and I think that the fact that we've done that in the appropriate areas within the context of the Act 250 language we have, is how we would define whether a project has met the avoid, minimize, and mitigate. It's hard for me to understand, and I explained that last year, how that would play out, how B would play out, how do we actually, what does that actually look like or mean in the context of a project going through Act 250? And I would argue that the work that we've done in those other areas are in fact the way we would want to see avoid, minimize, and mitigate. So because I think that we've already are dealing with that in the context of the other criteria and other sections, it's why I support the joint proposal, because it does address the last remaining, one of the major gaps that are missing from our language.
Representative Tarantini.
Yeah, well, you people know that I'm really concerned about greenhouse gases and things of this nature, but I'm more concerned about how much these permits are gonna cost homeowners and commercial developers. Can anybody tell me that?
I was responding to Representative Dolan. How about the, if you look on our proposal on page 13, in the last sentence under Roman numeral 3, shall only allow mitigation when demonstrated by the applicant that it is not feasible. It seems like a pretty high bar. They
Excuse
have
me.
to overcome. I'm just wondering.
Where's my answer?
So, I guess I appreciate Carrie's analysis of the rest of the bill supporting our intent to address climate change and the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And I also think we took a lot of testimony on this section last year. And unfortunately, Tom just left, but to his point, it's proven to be a pretty difficult one, and I think its goals are noble, but I'm not sure we are ready to include it in the bill at this time. Hours, I think 9M is good. It does meet a gap in our bill, and I do like the goals of our changes to criterion, to the air pollution criteria, and I still might support having air called out separately, because I think it makes just logical sense. And it also creates that opportunity, if we get to a place in the future of having the ability to provide more guidance on this. I don't feel like we're there right now.
Go with that.
All right? Okay. So I think we're gonna include, the climate adaptation, where it makes sense. It might be 9M, it might be some, if it, where you find, we'd like 9M to be in our draft, and we'll take out, the specifics under ours, but I think leave it as air pollution is criteria 1.
And stop after,
Yeah, do you wanna take out just A and B and have it just be that first paragraph, the air pollution paragraph?
Let's try that, yeah.
Alright, page 14, criterion 10. So your bill contains some updates to criterion 10, which requires conformance with the local and regional plan. So your updates require that a local plan to be used under Act 250 has to be approved. It also requires currently that the regional plan be approved by VERB. That was one of the powers that you gave the board. It also requires conformance with future land use maps contained in the plans. And it also has that really fun language under subdivision B that a local or regional plan is only can only be used if the language you can decline to use the language of a plan if it does not afford a person of ordinary intelligence with a reasonable opportunity to understand the provisions, and that comes from case law. So it's requiring clarity in the plans to be, and that they be easily understood. So the joint proposal is largely similar to yours. The differences are that their board is different and they got rid of the district commissions. So in substance, they also require that the local plans be approved, but they don't require approval of regional plans because their board isn't going to be doing that under their proposal. So and they do also require conformance with the land maps and that the plans be easily understandable. So the differences lie in the structure of the board and use of district commissions primarily.
And you did point it out that the joint proposal did not include the language about regional plans. And I think we have established in other parts of procedure that our regional plans and town plans need to match. The regional plans, the Regional Planning Commission needs to have the town plans in compliance, so maybe it's the other way around. And is that accurate? I'm not saying this very eloquently.
Sure, so, currently, town plans don't have to be approved by the Regional Planning Commission to be used in Act 250. And so that means that they could either not comply or be missing something.
Okay.
If your town plan isn't approved, it can still be used in Act 250 currently. This is asking that the town plan be approved by the Regional Planning Commission as consistent.
Right.
Also, currently, no one has to approve a regional plan. There isn't necessarily a direct oversight of that.
Right.
And so your proposal broadly was giving your board the power to oversee the regional plans also.
And there's not, joint, not.
Correct.
And I'm noticing there's also a difference in the maps that are called out. This one, ours calls out a future land use map, and theirs calls out land use maps in the local and regional plans.
Yeah, I don't know if that was, I don't know.
And I'm also, is this the section where if we go forward with the downtown, removing downtowns from Act 250 jurisdiction, is this where we would clarify that they had appropriate zoning bylaws in this section of our bill?
No.
We would do it more right where that is called out.
That would probably be in the actual like municipal bylaw section, like in Title 24, right? Because if they're not going to be part of the Act 250 process at all, it would have to be in there. The designated downtown process would have to have the establishment of the requirements.
Okay, so I'd like to make sure that we do that. Okay. In the next draft. Yeah.
Trying to recall testimony from the Vermont Planners Association from last year. I think they didn't like this language. It sounded pretty top down to them. But when I say this language, I'm trying to parse out which part of this language, but Charlie may be able to help us, or help me. But I'm thinking that the part that I do like is the conformance. And I think 248 requires conformance with a town plan unless the town has a viable alternative. Now I'm dragging something else into this discussion, but there is precedent already set for having them required, not the touchy-feely I think we kind of have now about we'd like to have our town plans in conformance with the regional plan. That's really the whole goal of a regional plan. So I don't know how to quite parse those thoughts out. Could you respond to that, Ellen, please? And then maybe Charlie would shed some light on a pop quiz.
I don't quite know what you were asking.
Okay, I'm not surprised because that's not very eloquent here. I'm asking how we might do what I think the Vermont Planning Association did not, I'm thinking they did not want to vest top down, it's gotta all be approved by the board, both sets of plans. And I don't think they liked that, I'm not sure that I like that top down either from the board, and right at the moment, we don't even know what that's gonna end up meaning. But but if we took that out, and are we able to take that part out but keep the town plans should be in conformance with the regional plan?
So this is requiring that the town plan be approved by the regional planning commission,
Yeah.
not by the board.
Right, well, but
The regional plan
yeah,
would be approved by the board. So the town adopts a plan and then they submit it to the regional planning commission for approval. That's 4350.
okay.
And then regional plans are currently not reviewed by an overarching entity, so those under this proposal would go to the verb for approval.
Yeah, and that's the parts I think the
Yeah.
part I wanna parse out.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
Charlie could help us remember that regional plans used to be reviewed. No, there's never been a review.
There was a, sorry, Charles Baker, Executive Director of the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, for the record. There was a council that was in statute where towns could appeal the regional plan. If there was a contradiction between the town and regional, they could bring it to that commission, but that commission never met. It was removed from statute a few years ago. So it was a non-functional part of statute.
And is there consensus among the regional planning commissions on how regional plans might be approved?
I think we were kind of agnostic as to exactly who or which body, but I think we're open definitely to the idea of some central body reviewing it so that there was more consistency with statute. I will say, right now it's kind of a circular process, right? The towns make up the board of the Regional Planning Commission, so it's the towns that approve of the regional plan, and then the Regional Planning Commission reviews each individual town to make sure it's consistent. So there's a circle there that works, but as Representative McCullough referenced, when we were doing the energy planning work, there was another layer added at the Department of Public Service to make sure the energy planning work was done consistently across the state, so that agency reviewed, or the commissioner certified each of our plans were consistent with a set of criteria that the department did for that particular topic. That's the only place where there's state level review and approval of the plans.
So towns without zoning then would have no standing in Act 250 under Oasis?
So a town can have a plan and not have permanent zoning bylaws. I don't know how many there are, but
So what
Kurt-
about this kingdom could do that?
With plans?
No,
They don't have either.
Yeah.
Well, if they don't have either, then they don't have anything to review conformance with. But if they could have a plan without zoning, then they would,
yeah.
if their plan was approved. Is that true?
Currently their plan does not have to be approved to have relevance under criterion 10.
But under both of these, they do.
Under both of these, yes.
So I'm gonna say we, well, I guess we need to pick one option, but I would say we leave in the review of regional plans for now and note that it may or may not, depending on the board structure we go with, it may or may not make sense for the NRB to be that body.
Yeah, and if I may ask, I agree with that. Maybe if we made clear in Title 24, Section 117, that regional plans are to conform with state goals, and the local plans are to be approved by the regional planning commissions. Maybe with making that kind of clear in the actual enabling legislation pertaining to regional planning. That way it's all,
That is in your bill currently, 9.2.
We just haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
and that way if it's exempt, it still has that conformance
I-
requirement.
Have to speak up a little.
That's, if we have areas that are exempt from the Act 250, this approval still needs to occur and be consistent with state goals.
All right, so actually, that's the substantive difference is that approval of the regional plan between the two proposals. So let's leave our language in for now.
Okay, so the next sort of topic area, broadly, the joint proposal proposes to set up a sort of study committee and a report on a number of regional and municipal planning issues that are in your bill currently. So you have a lot of things in the right column that basically the joint proposal directs the Natural Resources Board to work with ACCD and put out recommendations on. So the first is you add a new section to Act 250, Section 6000, which is the purpose and construction section. So the purposes of this chapter are to protect and conserve the environment of the state and to support the achievement of the goals of the Capability and Development Plan and of 24 VSA 4302, which is the planning, municipal and regional planning section in Title 24.
I'm seeing page 15 up on the screen, and I'm looking at my paper, page 15.
I'm actually at the bottom of page 14.
Bottom
Sorry,
of 14.
I'm sorry.
And, okay.
I like excuse me.
Go ahead.
I appreciate having us study it into a draft report and a final report. I think this is one area that we took a significant amount of testimony last year, but we have spent little time on it this year, and it's substantial and important. And I think putting this section aside and having us really learn more about how to incorporate or use better the capability and development work, findings, maps, plans, I think will only make help us if we put that into a study. So I support the joint proposal to do that.
I'm not quite ready to throw them all out. I think some of these we are ready to do. I hear you on some of it, so I think we need to put a little bit more of a fine point on it.
Sure, so the next two are adding a new finding to the Capability and Development Plan related to greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. So I'm still at the very bottom of page 14. And then moving into page 15, amending an existing finding in the Capability and Development Plan.
So I want to go back though,
Oh,
just to
sure.
the first paragraph
Yeah.
under the purpose of this chapter
Yep.
are to protect and conserve the environment of the state, and to support the achievement of the goals of the Capability and Development Plan. I think that's important. And I think we need to understand what it's doing in terms of the Capability and Development Plan that's not happening today. So this is it is a challenging section of the law. because there's something called the Capability and Development Plan in the law that was not ever implemented. And it's my understanding the language here actually says, no, we want to have a Capability and Development Plan. Is that, am I right?
Yeah, so when Act 250 was enacted 50 years ago in 1970, it contained 4 findings that sort of set out the broad policy goals, but also directed in Section 6042 for there to be the creation of a capability and development plan to be sort of one of the guiding, the ways that it would guide the implementation of Act 250. So that never really came about under that in Section 6042. However, in 1973, the legislature adopted 19 findings which became the Capability and Development Plan, and so they're detailed findings of the goals of Act 250, and so they're used as the overarching goal, and the statute in Chapter 151 are the tools to achieve that goal. So, but there is a statement currently in Criterion 9 that the goals in the Capability and Development Plan can't be used as specific criteria when granting a permit. So there's a little bit of a disconnect between how exactly the goals, which are in session law and are not tied specifically to the statute, how those are supposed to be used. And so this is creating a direct link between those goals that were enacted in 1973 and the actual statute. So another way that it could have played out, we could have actually put all 19 of them potentially in the statute, but this is a reference to it.
Do we put goals in statute?
Yeah.
And so I wonder why they weren't in statute.
Well, who
We don't have a lot
of any of our historians here? So
Yeah.
there was an Act 250 originally had a planning component to it envisioned, and that doesn't exist as it was originally envisioned. So I think there was, in 1970, thoughts on how that was going to be developed and implemented, and it was not. So there was a little bit of a hole created, and this sort of is what happened. So that's probably not the most eloquent, but often when you have pieces of statute, there is one of the first sections does lay out the purpose and goals section, but there are other statutes that have things like that, and it's for statutory interpretation, like when there are court cases.
And then I'm noticing, I think under the joint proposal on page 14, the A, the number 1, that's actually, they're saying we should study whether or not those goals should be incorporated into the statute.
Yeah.
Study them.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, then you were going to keep walking us through. So we add a number 20.
Yes, you added a 20 so that there's a reference to greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. Did you want me to read through that? Or
Folks want to just read it on their own, or do you want Ellen to read it? On our own. So that, I was just reading the one on number the 20 climate greenhouse gas, and then how do folks feel about that staying?
Makes sense.
Okay. And then the next one, ecosystem protection and utilization of natural resources. This is actually amending the statute. And where does this fit?
So this is amending part of the capability and one of the findings.
Oh,
Yeah.
so it's not,
It's not in the statute, it's still in the findings of the capability and development plan.
okay.
Question?
Yes.
First, I'm thinking if we're going to, no, I'm wrong, I beg your pardon. So when we're now talking about ecosystem protection and utilization of natural resources, we're still on purpose and construction. Is that accurate, or are we?
Sorry, we're still on what?
Just on findings.
Still another
For the
finding.
capability and development planning.
So we added a 20, and then ecosystem protection is getting added to number 2.
Okay. Yeah, so we're still in the same section, if you will, yes.
This is a section. This modifies the findings
Thoughts on this addition of ecosystem protection?
for the
Yeah.
Right.
You like that? Yeah. Okay. So I think leaving that number 2 changes and under ecosystem protection.
Then the next thing is you amended section 6030.
This is where I do wanna raise my hand, talk about.
You often raise your hand. Which we're grateful for. Representative McCullough.
So it sounds like we've then chosen our version of in municipal planning, purpose and construction over the joint proposal. But I'm wondering, I'm looking for opinions from council and from the chair and the rest of the group, if this is not an opportunity, if this is an opportunity to merge. And so I'm looking at, on page 14, Sec 11, Vermont Regional Municipal Planning Review. If we struck their first their paragraph, because I think that is in violation, if you will, with our first paragraph, but then I think a lot of the,
Well, their A is just calling for the study of everything that follows.
yes, and I'm just wondering if we would like to actually have some of that study.
I think we do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think we're getting there.
I like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, good, so,
It does take up regional plans again and how they're reviewed
yeah,
on 5.
good.
So their sub 3 relates to your proposal on page 16, which is an update to the capability and development maps. And we haven't talked about this in a long time, but they sort of, you add a requirement in section 6030 for there to be maps updated to be consistent with the capability and development plan. And they think that should be studied as opposed to being put in statute.
So let's go through ours and see if we're ready to commit to it or if we think it should be studied.
Sure. Can I ask, what time do you guys have to be somewhere?
The housing conservation board's coming in 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
We have to be here, but.
Oh, it's here, okay. So section 6030, updates on or before January 1, 2021, the board and secretaries of Commerce and Community Development, of Digital Services, Agriculture, Food and Markets, and Natural Resources shall complete an update to the capability and development maps created under this chapter in 1971 for reference in applying this chapter. Maps updated pursuant to this section shall be consistent with the capability and development plan and shall include and identify environmental constraints, existing settlements, rural and working land areas, critical resource areas, facilities and infrastructure, and areas targeted for conservation, public investment, and development. The board and these secretaries shall complete further updates to these maps, not less frequency than every 8 years. The board shall lead and coordinate the completion of updates pursuant to this section. When updating maps pursuant to this section, the board and secretaries shall, prior to completing the update, consult with the regional planning commissions and issue a draft update, provide public notice of the draft update, and offer an opportunity for written public comment, and conduct one or more public meetings to receive oral comment on the draft update. The updated maps shall be maintained as a layer of the Agency of Natural Resources Atlas and shall be available to the public. So I'm remembering some testimony from the planners during the Act 250 commission process that there were maps created in 1971, and they haven't been updated.
Yeah.
Jim?
What does not less frequently mean? I'm having issues.
Double negatives.
Yeah,
At least every 8 years, they can do it more often if they would like.
I'm wondering if that's not better language.
It's understandable.
Not less frequently.
Litigated, not litigated.
Yeah.
I wonder
We
whether.
can rephrase that.
I wonder whether there's going to be a lot of argument about what the maps actually show, how accurate they are. I'm just wondering about that.
Which I'm hearing as a question of, are we ready to do this?
Yeah, I just.
I'm ready to do it. I think it ought to be in here. Will there be argument about it? But what do we not argue about in this building? But I would also add, and maybe it's implicit, that these maps are for jurisdictional purposes. They're not just comic books. And our maps have been dismissed so far as, oh, we never intended you guys to use these things. And I think a positive statement may need to be made. Maybe because it's in here, that positive statement is implicit. Would that be, how do you read that idea? No. Do we need to be explicit about
Sure. I think we could add language to make it more clear if you would prefer.
So I don't know if we do that, if we do that if we keep this in, but otherwise we're spinning our wheels at this point to start fine tuning it. I'd like to keep it in and then worry about fine tuning it, perhaps. I think that's kind of the way we've been looking at stuff.
I didn't mean in the building, I meant in the process. When people are looking at me, well, we're lost. Well, New World was discovered, they made maps.
They thought they were in India.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So accuracy does matter.
And I think we may recall last year taking testimony on what these maps are. And I think we heard, or at least from my perspective, it was that they were the common sense maps to help identify where existing infrastructure was, where there was ledges or lands that weren't available because of physical constraints to development, and where the natural resources are, where the rivers are. It wasn't rocket science type mapping. It was about just the basic mapping needs for site plan, you know. And so I just wanted to remind ourselves about what these maps are, and it was about that big picture of
I think the vision of it is to create consistency across the districts around the data that gets used by the district commissions when they're evaluating the Act 250 criteria. I'm imagining it's a layer in the A&R atlas of the relevant data to help district commissions begin their conversation about a project. Not, you know, and each data layer will come with the caveats that it needs to represent its accuracy. I don't think we should be that far away from being here, given the amount of mapping that we already have. And I think it's about that consistency. And so we need to pause now. I'd like us to think about this in terms of that as the goal. And we'll take it back up after with Laura. And thank you very much, Ellen.
Yep.
And the committee.
Thank you. Good job.
Shift gears.